"Mom, your name's not on the list." My son blocked me right at the entrance of my granddaughter's wedding in front of 200 people. My name is Denise Parker, 72 years old, a widow, but they forgot one small detail. I was the one who paid for the entire event. I had spent the whole morning getting ready. My oldest granddaughter's wedding was something a grandmother waits her whole life for. My Clara, I still remembered changing her diapers, teaching her how to make rice pudding, Robert's favorite dessert, and now she was getting married. My heart was full of pride. I chose the pink silk dress I had kept for years for a special occasion, wore my mother's pearl necklace, and sprayed a little French perfume I only used for big celebrations. I felt beautiful, elegant, and worthy. I wanted Clara to see me as a happy grandmother, a strong woman, but I didn't know that in my son Richard's eyes I was nothing more than a burden. For 6 months my life had revolved around preparing for this wedding. Richard and his wife Susan would come to my house, sit on my velvet couch, sip the coffee I made, and speak in soft tones. "You know, Mom, times are tough these days." Then Susan added, "We just want Clara to have her dream wedding." Naively, I opened my heart and my wallet. "How much does Clara's dream wedding cost?" I asked. They showed me a brochure. The venue looked like a palace. The catering included lobster, and the wedding gown cost as much as a new car. And I paid every single dollar, over $100,000, all from the savings Robert left, meant to ensure I could live comfortably and help family when needed. I signed the contracts, handled the vendors, managed every detail. My name appeared on every receipt. That afternoon I called a cab, excited and proud. The driver, a cheerful young man, said, "You look fancy, ma'am, heading to a big party." I smiled. It's my granddaughter's happiest day. When we arrived at Green Valley Estate, the venue took my breath away. White floral arches, twinkling lights on the trees, soft classical music floating in the air. Guests were arriving, all dressed to impress, chatting and laughing. 200 people, family, friends, neighbors, distant relatives. Everyone smiled and greeted me, complimenting the beautiful event. I walked proudly toward the main gate. Richard and Susan were greeting guests. My son looked sharp in his perfectly fitted suit. Susan sparkled in a bright emerald dress that made her look like a Christmas tree. "Richard, my son, everything looks wonderful," I said as I stepped forward to hug him, but he didn't move. His eyes were cold, distant, like those of a stranger. Susan turned away, pretending to fix the flowers. "Mom," he said, his tone icy, "what are you doing here?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. "What am I doing here? I came to my live granddaughter's wedding, of course." He grabbed the guest list from the receptionist's hands and looked at it for a long moment. The music faded. 200 guests behind me fell silent. I could feel all eyes on me. "Your name isn't on the list," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. My smile disappeared. "What do you mean, Richard? What kind of joke is this?" "It's not a joke," he said curtly. "Probably a mistake in the invitation process." "A mistake?" I was the one who paid for the invitations and helped Susan double-CH check the guest list to make sure no one was forgotten. Shame burned across my face like fire. I looked at Susan. She was smirking in triumph. Everyone was still staring. My longtime neighbor covered her mouth in shock. My nephew looked down, pretending to scroll through his phone. No one said a word in my defense. I was humiliated in front of everyone, treated like an intruder. I took a deep breath, a lifetime of dignity. I wouldn't let an ungrateful child destroy it. I straightened my necklace and looked straight into my son's cold eyes. "All right, sweetheart," I said calmly. "If I'm a mistake, I'm sorry for the inconvenience." I turned around and walked away with my head held high. 200 people stepped aside as I passed as if I carried a disease. No one touched me. No one offered a hand. I walked under the floral arch I had paid for to the sound of the music I had chosen, leaving behind the celebration I had built. The cab driver was still waiting. "Did you forget something, ma'am?" he asked. I replied, "Yes. I forgot what kind of son I raised." The ride home was silent. Anger and humiliation sat heavy in my chest, too heavy even for tears. They had used me, drained every ounce of kindness I had, and tossed me aside once I was no longer useful. They wanted my money, not me. They were ashamed of their old mother. When I got home, the apartment felt painfully quiet. The pink dress looked ridiculous now. I took it off and threw it on the floor. My eyes went to the photo of Robert on the wall. He would never have allowed this to happen. He would have looked Richard straight in the eye and said, "You're no son of mine." But Robert wasn't here anymore, only me. I could have cried, called a friend to vent, or taken a sleeping pill to forget. But the woman who came home that night was not the same Denise who had left. The humiliation had awakened something in me. The woman who once ran her husband's business for 10 years, managed finances, negotiated contracts, and knew the value of every dollar. I didn't cry. I walked straight into my office, opened the cabinet, and took out a cream-colored folder labeled Clara's wedding. Inside was everything. The venue contract with my signature, catering invoices in my name, decoration receipts, and wire transfers from my account to each vendor. I picked up the plan phone. My lawyer, Martin Hayes, had been my legal advisor for 30 years. He answered right away. "Mrs. Parker, what a coincidence. Today's your granddaughter's big day, isn't it?" I smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Martin, I need the best attorney you can be tomorrow morning. Do you have 5 minutes for you? I have the whole evening." "What happened? I was asked to leave the wedding I paid for," I said slowly. "My son and daughter-in-law think they can take my money and treat me like garbage. I need you to help me fix that." I sat down in my leather chair, the folder opened before me. The pain was still raw. The humiliation still burned, but beneath it a plan had already formed. Richard thought he had excluded me from the party. He didn't know I had just closed the door on his easy life. Tomorrow morning, instead of an apology, he'd receive a court summon. I didn't sleep that night. Not after what happened at my granddaughter's wedding. I sat in the living room, the pink dress still lying on the floor, a symbol of disgrace. The old clock ticked like it was whispering, "Mistake, mistake." Dawn broke, but the house still felt heavy. I didn't brew coffee. The smell, once comforting, now felt bitter. The ache in my chest wasn't sharp anymore, just deep and tired, like the grief of losing a child I thought I had. At 9:00 a.m. the doorbell rang. Martin stood there. He had been part of our family for decades, even Richard's godfather. When he saw my face, he froze. Then anger flickered across his eyes. "Good Lord, Denise, sit down. I'm fine," I said. "The files are on the table." He took off his coat, sat at the dining table, and began reading. I stood by the window. It was a beautiful day. Neighborhood kids playing outside. The kind of Sunday when I should have been at a fancy hotel, eating breakfast with my granddaughter, laughing about the party. "Denise," Martin's voice pulled me back. "I see the contracts, the receipts, everything's in your name. You paid from your personal account. Legally, you're the event's owner, the host." I laughed bitterly. "The host locked out of her own party, how ironic." "It's not just ironic," he said grimly, "it's humiliation." We both thought of Richard. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "We can sue for emotional distress. You have 200 witnesses." I turned to him. "Martin, what do you think I want? An apology? A compensation check written with my own money?" That's when it hit me. The real revelation wasn't about humiliation, it was about power. They never saw me as a mother or a grandmother. To them, I was a wallet that never ran dry. And when people don't need a wallet anymore, they close it. Or in their case, they lock it out of the party so it doesn't ruin their perfect family photos. I remembered all the years of being dismissed, all the little ways they made me feel small. "Mom, you don't understand real estate investments," Richard once said when I told him to buy an apartment to rent instead of that luxury car. "Mrs. Parker, this phone is too complicated for you," Susan once told me with that pitying tone when I asked about the banking app. They had no idea that after Robert's death, I ran his logistics company for a decade, negotiated contracts, dealt with unions, balanced the books to the last cent. I sold the company 5 years ago for a fortune. Richard and Susan thought it was just retirement money. They had no idea how much it was. They thought the $100,000 was a huge sacrifice. I realized I had never truly been a person to them. I was the nice mom, the free babysitter so they could have date nights, the one who signed checks for the granddaughter's college tuition, the one who paid Susan's credit card bill. Just this once. It wasn't family. I was a function. "Martin," I said, and my voice was different now. The tremor from crying was gone. "Keep the wedding file, it's proof but not the weapon." Martin frowned. "Denise, what are you planning? Where are Richard and Susan now? I assume they're on their honeymoon." "Paris, right." I heard Clara mention that, he said. "Good, they'll have 15 happy days, let them enjoy it." I went into Robert's old office, opened the safe and took out a blue folder. I placed it in front of Martin. "This," I said, "is rediscovered power." Inside were 2 property deeds, one for the apartment where Richard and Susan lived, 3 bedrooms, a large balcony. Martin's eyes widened. "Everything's in your name." "Of course," I said. "I bought it as an investment." Richard said rent was too high and wanted a better place for the kids. I let them live there. No contract, no rent, they'd been there for no years. Never paid property tax or building fees, I paid it all. Martin swallowed hard. "And the second deed, the beach house, the one where they take pictures and post online, calling it our little paradise, also mine," I continued. "Martin, in my garage, there's a grey car Richard drives around. He calls it a company car. That company used to be mine. I sold it, but the cars remained under my name. The insurance, the taxes, everything." Martin closed the blue folder, leaning back like a general studying a battle map. "Denise Parker," he said quietly, "what do you want me to do?" "They erased my name from the guest list," I said. "Now it's my turn." I started pacing. My headache was gone. Hunger, too, sadness had turned into fuel. First, their apartment. I want a formal eviction notice. When they land back from Paris, I want an officer waiting for them. No, better yet, posted on the door. 30 days to move out. That's what the law says, right? If it were up to my heart, I'd give them 30 minutes, but I'll follow the law. Second, the beach house. Change the locks tomorrow. Hire a security company. If they try to enter, it's trespassing. Third, the car. Send a registered letter demanding immediate return. If not, file a police report for misappropriation of property. I stopped, grabbed my purse, took out my phone and opened the banking app, the same one Susan said I couldn't use. I went to scheduled transfers. There it was, allowance, Richard Parker, $4,000 monthly. I turned the screen to Martin. He let out a low whistle. $4,000 a month. Yes, the allowance, as they call it. Susan doesn't work. She calls herself an influencer, inspiring her friends to shop with my money. And Richard's salary from that tiny ad agency barely covers the suit he wore to humiliate me. I pressed cancel transfer. The screen blinked. Scheduled transfer cancelled. Done, I said. Martin was silent for a long moment. He no longer looked at me with pity, but with respect. "They're going to hate you, Denise," he said quietly. "They already do, Martin. They just hid it well because they needed my money. They don't hate me for being cruel. They hate me for being old. They hate me because I remind them they're nothing without me. Let them hate me but from afar. And Broke and Clara, he asked softly, that one hit where it hurt. She knew her grandmother paid for her dress, knew I was turned away at the door and said nothing. She made her choice, chose the party, the money, her parents. Now she lived with that choice without her grandmother's privileges. I took a deep breath. Martin, we spend our whole lives nurturing our children. But when a tree grows and only bears rotten fruit, you have to stop watering it and sometimes you have to cut it down. Martin stood up and slipped the folder into his briefcase. I'll prepare the notices today. When they return, someone from the building will be waiting. The beach house locks will be changed by tomorrow morning. He paused at the door. Will you be all right? I looked at Robert's smiling photo on the wall. I'll be fine, Martin. Last night, I felt like a mistake. Today I feel like a beginning. He nodded and left. I closed the door. The house was quiet, but not the silence of defeat. It was the silence before battle, the silence of strategy. My son and daughter-in-law were flying across the Atlantic, sipping champagne, laughing, believing they had fooled the foolish old woman. They were headed to the city of light. But when they came back, every light in their comfortable lives would go dark. The following 15 days were the strangest of my life. They were in Paris eating cheese and drinking wine while I was in New York dismantling everything that had once been their privilege. Everything unfolded quietly, precisely as I had planned. The fragile woman was gone, replaced by Denise Parker, the strategist. I became a general, moving each piece with intention. On the first day Martin called, Denise, the beach house locks have been changed. Security will be there around the clock. Good, I said. Send me the receipts and the new keys. While he handled that, I took care of the rest. The pink dress still lay on the floor unwashed. I tore it apart with my own hands, piece by piece, and threw it in the trash bag. Then I cleaned. I walked into the guest room, their room as they called it. I gathered the expensive sheets and towels Susan had insisted I buy and tossed them into the trash. The guest room was now just a room again. Passing through the living room, I saw the Christmas photo from last year. Me, Richard, Susan, and Clara smiling brightly. Susan's smile in that picture was the same one she wore when she watched me being humiliated. I removed the photo and put it in a dark drawer. In its place I said another, Robert and me on the day we opened our transport company. 2 young people covered in grease but glowing with pride, ready to conquer the world. It's done, Robert, I whispered. The house is clean again. A week passed. Then came the first of the month, the day they usually received $4,000 from me. I woke early, made coffee, and sat in my armchair waiting. In Paris, they were probably strolling through the streets. I closed my eyes and pictured it. Susan, holding her luxury shopping bags, walked into another boutique and handed over her card. The clerk swiped once, then twice. I'm sorry, ma'am, the card's been declined. I imagined Susan's face turning red. That's impossible. Try again. My husband's wealthy. Meanwhile, Richard sat in a corner cafe trying to pay for his croissant, only to have his card declined too. I could almost hear their silent panic, the first crack in their perfect facade. They didn't call me, but by the end of the day, a message appeared on the old phone I had kept just for this. Mom, are you okay? The money didn't go through. Did something happen? It was from Richard. The concern in his words was obvious. Not, Mom, how are you after the wedding? But where's the money? I stared at the message. My fingers itched to reply to release everything I'd been holding in. But Denise, the woman who had learned strategy, knew silence was the strongest weapon. I didn't respond. I simply deleted the message. While they were in Paris, staring at their empty accounts, confused and anxious, I knew this was only the first step of my plan. Disorientation. In the following days, Martin continued his work. Denise, the eviction notice has been filed with the court. The bailiff's appointment is set for the day they return. As for the car retrieval letter, I sent it to their apartment address. The doorman will hand it to them personally. I felt lighter than I had in years. After living so long as just a grandmother, I had forgotten I was still Denise. I started going out again. I went to the salon and got a short, modern haircut, the kind Susan once said only young women could pull off. I dyed my hair light brown, erasing the grey that had aged me. I stopped by the mall, not to buy gifts for my granddaughter or household items, but to buy the newest laptop. I hired a young tutor for private lessons. I want to learn everything from spreadsheets and investing to financial apps, I told him. Susan had thought I couldn't even use a phone. She didn't know that within a week I had transferred 90% of my assets into a secure investment fund that not even the president could access. The remaining balance I moved into a new digital bank account, one only I had the password for. The old account Richard knew about. I left exactly $1,000 in it just in case he tried something. I had finally protected myself. On Saturday, the day before they returned, I did something I hadn't done in years, drove. I took my old favorite car from the garage and went to the beach house. I used the new keys Martin had sent by courier. The house was silent. No trace of Susan's sugary perfume. No imported beers from Richard in the fridge. It was mine again. I sat on the porch looking out at the ocean and cried not out of pain but relief. I cried for the woman who had allowed herself to be used. I cried for Robert because I had let his son become so heartless. "It's over now, Robert," I whispered. "From now on I control my life and my money." I spent the night at the beach house and drove back Sunday, the day their flight landed. I knew the plane from Paris would arrive in New York in the afternoon. Factoring in customs, baggage, and traffic, they'd reach the apartment around 8:00 p.m. I took a salt bath, put on my silk pajamas, brewed chamomile tea, and sat in my favorite armchair facing the landline. I wasn't nervous. I was calm. At 8:15, the phone rang Richard's number. I let it ring a few times before picking up. "Hello," I said in the calmest tone. The shouting on the other end made me pull the phone away from my ear. "Mom, what the hell is this? Are you insane? Did you kick us out of the apartment?" I heard Susan screaming in the background. "She's lost her mind." "Call the police, Richard." I waited for the chaos to settle. "Richard, lower your voice. I'm not deaf." "What are you talking about? There's a notice taped to the door. An eviction notice 30 days. You're joking, right?" "Oh," that I said evenly. "No, it's not a joke, dear. It's a legal notice." "Very serious, serious. You're throwing your own son out on the street." "No, I'm reclaiming my property. That apartment belongs to me. You'll need to find somewhere else to live." Silence on the other end. He hadn't expected me to speak like that. He thought I'd cry, apologize, blame the lawyer. "This is about the wedding, isn't it?" "That was just a misunderstanding," he said, his voice softening into that pleading tone he always used when he needed money. "Mom, please." Susan was just stressed. "She didn't mean it. There was a mistake with the list." I cut him off. "A mistake, Richard. The invitations I paid for, the list I personally reviewed. You looked your mother in the eye and said, 'You're not on the list.' You threw me out of a party I paid for. You and your wife made me a laughingstock. And now I understand." "Understand what, Mom? You're destroying this family." "No, Richard," I said coldly. "I understand that I no longer have a family. I have one son and one parasitic daughter-in-law living off my money, staying in my apartment, driving my car, and banning me from my granddaughter's wedding." "That's not true." "We love you," Susan shouted, grabbing the phone. "You love my money, Susan." "But the money's gone," I replied. "Gone?" Richard's voice rose in panic. What about the allowance on the first of the month? It stopped. I'm old, Richard, and old people have medical bills. I need that money to live. The car you received a letter about, I need to sell it. But that's my car. I need it for work. Then work because besides that, you have 30 days to leave my apartment. He exploded over the phone, even threatening to sue me and claim I wasn't mentally competent so he could control my assets. I laughed a short, dry laugh. Go ahead, Richard, but good lawyers are expensive, and like I said, your money's gone. Meanwhile, Martin is working full-time for this incompetent old woman. I took another deep breath. Richard, you blocked me at the door by mistake. I blocked you by choice. You have 30 days. The clock started the moment you read that notice. Good night, son, and welcome home from your honeymoon. I hung up. The room fell into silence, the most beautiful silence I had ever known. My house suddenly felt just right. Not too big, not too empty, just enough for peace. The phone rang again and again. I imagined them frantically redialing as if their survival depended on it. I walked over and unplugged it. I sat back down and inhaled deeply. For the first time since that night of humiliation, the air felt light. The shame and pain had returned to where they belonged behind me. I slept 8 full hours without a single dream. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows. I went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee. The strong, kind Robert used to say was powerful enough to wake the dead. As the water poured over the grounds, I opened my new phone, the one Richard didn't know existed. 37 messages, all from Richard and Susan all through the night. The first, Mom, please pick up. This was a mistake. Let's talk. The second, you monster, you're ruining your son's life. Susan fainted. If anything happens to her, it's your fault. The third, Denise, it's Richard. I've thought it over. We can make a deal. How much do you want to stop this? Half the apartment is mine by inheritance. I laughed out loud. Inheritance, I was still very much alive. I deleted all the messages, grabbed my bag, and went to my computer class. While I was learning how to make spreadsheets in Excel and realizing I was actually quite good at it, Richard, after a sleepless night, decided to prove who really had control. He put on the expensive suit he'd bought with my money, went down to the garage, and tried to drive his luxury car, my car, to the office. His small advertising agency barely made enough to pay the bills, but he didn't expect the doorman, Mr. George, to be so loyal. Good morning, Mr. Richard, Mrs. Susan. Welcome back from your trip, George said politely, his hand resting on the gate control. Good morning, George. Open the gate. I'm in a hurry, Richard said, pressing the car key. The car beeped, but the gate stayed closed. George, I said, open the gate. Richard barked. George stepped out of the booth, looking uneasy. I'm sorry, sir, but I have direct orders from the owner, Mrs. Denise Parker. Richard froze. Orders? What orders? This vehicle isn't authorized to leave the garage. It's on the list of assets to be reclaimed. The insurance company has been notified. If you attempt to drive it away, I'm required to call the police and report a stolen vehicle. I'm truly sorry, sir, but the law is the law. This car isn't in your name. I later heard the story from Mrs. Martha, my neighbor from the building across the street who was out walking her dog and saw everything. She told me. Susan screamed, calling George, that old hag's puppet. Richard turned red as a beet, opened the car door, unbuckled the child seat from my grandson, the one I had bought, and threw everything onto the garage floor before walking out to hail a taxi. That was the first consequence, public humiliation, just like what I had endured, except instead of 200 wedding guests, his witnesses were the neighbors and the doorman. The big businessman was banned from driving his own car. The second consequence came that same afternoon. Susan, hungry and frantic, opened the food delivery app. Her card was declined. She tried another, declined, tried Richard's. Same result. The $4,000 I had sent them each month wasn't extra money. It was their lifeline and I had cut it off. They couldn't call me, I had unplugged the phone. They couldn't spend, I had locked their accounts. They couldn't drive, I had blocked the car. So there was only one thing left for them to do. Me. That day I had just finished my computer class and was carrying my new laptop in my bag. When I reached the entrance of my building, they were standing there, Richard and Susan, looking like two shipwreck survivors. Susan's hair was messy, her makeup smudged. Richard's face was twisted in anger so intense that I barely recognized my own son. "Mom!" he shouted, rushing toward me. I stopped. My doorman, Mr. Patrick, was about to intervene, but I gestured for him to stay put. "Richard, Susan, what a surprise," I said coldly. "Open the door. We need to talk," Richard said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. "I have nothing to say, and you're not allowed inside my home. You can't do this. I'm your son. I live here." "No, Richard, you've lived in my apartment for 10 years for free, and you still have 30 days to move out." Mrs. Denise, Susan's trembling voice broke in that same fake tone she always used. "Please don't be cruel. We were wrong, we're sorry. It was the receptionist's mistake. She mixed up the guest list." "Susan," I interrupted, "that performance is pathetic. You were the one checking the list. You stood there, watched my own son turn me away, and you smiled." I still remember that smile, the smile of victory. You thought you won, didn't you? You got a $100,000 wedding and got rid of the bothersome old woman all in one day. Quite a bargain. Susan went pale and couldn't say a word. Richard stepped forward, his tone threatening. "You'll regret this, you're old. You've lost your mind, I'll sue you. I'll prove you're mentally incompetent, wasting money like a fool." I looked at the son I once held in my arms, now threatening to take his mother to court. I burst out laughing, startling even Patrick. "Lost my mind, Richard. Let me show you something." I opened my bag, pulled out my phone, launched the banking app and held it up. "See this, the banking app. Yes, the one Susan said was too complicated for me. This morning I bought shares stocks from 2 major corporations. I can do that. What can you do besides spend my money?" My voice was no longer that of an old woman. It was the voice of Denise Parker, the woman who once ran Parker Logistics. "You want to sue me? Go ahead, but lawyers cost money and you don't have any. You want proof I'm senile. Last week I had a full evaluation from a top forensic psychiatrist. It cost me $5,000 and I have an 8-page report confirming I'm perfectly sane. Martin has a copy. Any judge who sees your lawsuit will laugh in your face because it's obvious you're just an ungrateful son trying to steal from your mother." Richard's face went from red to pale green. They had forgotten who I was. "You two think I'm just a faucet you can turn on for money, but tell me who built the pipeline." I stared straight into their eyes. "The 3-bedroom apartment you're clinging to, the luxury car you're mourning, the $4,000 monthly allowance you depended on. None of that was my fortune." I smiled. "That was pocket change." They stood frozen. "Richard, you think I sold the company and lived off retirement money. You're wrong. I only sold the trucking operations, the vehicles and the contracts, but I kept the warehouses, 6 of them. One leased to Amazon, one to FedEx, one to a pharmaceutical corporation." I locked eyes with my son. "Do you know how much rent I collect every month?" "No, you don't. Because if you did, you'd have treated me like a queen, even if only out of greed." I paused to let the words sink in. "The $100,000 I paid for your daughter's wedding, that's about what I pay in annual property taxes. Spare change, Richard. Money I gave out of love and you both threw it back in my face." Susan's mouth hung open. Richard's face went white, aged by 10 years in a moment. "You two forgot who I am. I'm not the nice mom or the sweet grandma. I'm Denise Parker, wife of Robert Parker, the woman who ran a transport company alone for a decade and made it worth 3 times more than before. You underestimated me, that's your biggest mistake. I turned to Patrick. Patrick, please call security, these two are trespassing. Wait, Mom, Richard shouted, panicked. Don't call me Mom, I said, my voice like steel. You lost that right at the wedding entrance. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an Italian class. Ariadne. I walked into the building. The glass doors closed in front of them. I didn't look back. While the elevator rose, my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Hello, Grandma, it's me, Clara. Her voice trembled, filled with tears. My heart, though hardened, still wavered. Clara, what a surprise. How was Paris? Was the wedding the one I paid for beautiful? Grandma, she sobbed. What's happening? Mom and Dad said you've lost your mind and kicked them out of their home. I took a deep breath. I haven't lost my mind, Clara. On the contrary, I've never been this clear. I'm simply taking back what's mine. The apartment, the car, the money, all of it belongs to me. But is this because of the wedding? I swear I didn't notice anything. It all happened so fast, I was so nervous. You didn't notice, I said softly, my tone sharp as glass. You didn't see your only grandmother, the one who raised you when your mother was busy getting her hair done. The one who paid for your wedding gown missing from the ceremony. You didn't notice the empty chair in the front row, the one where I was supposed to sit. You didn't ask why she kicked you out. Clara's voice quivered. No, Clara, I was humiliated in front of 200 people. Your father threw me out like a stray dog. And you, my granddaughter, stood there smiling and getting married. Then you went to Paris 15 days and not one call to ask if I was all right. You're calling now only because your parents ran out of money. The line was silent except for her muffled sobs. Your parents chose their path, Clara, and through your silence you chose too. I paused. You chose the party, the luxury. Now live with that choice. Live with what you chose. I still love you, Clara, but the foolish grandmother who paid for everything and endured everything is gone. She died at the doors of your wedding. I hung up. The elevator doors opened. I stepped into my apartment. The new balance of power had not only been established, it had been carved in stone. My new life began in silence, but it wasn't emptiness. It was peace. In the days that followed, I felt as if I had awoken from a long fever. Everything around me seemed sharper, brighter, and I finally was in control. The 30 days I gave Richard and Susan to leave passed quickly for me, but must have felt like a century for them. They stopped calling. Apparently they had hired a lawyer. Martin phoned me laughing heartily. Denise, I just got a call from a colleague, he said. Richard and Susan hired him to negotiate a peaceful agreement. I asked while watering my plants. And what did you tell them? I told them Mrs. Denise Parker doesn't negotiate with people who treated her like trash. The only agreement is to hand over the keys on day 30 or face eviction. He paused. He went silent after that. I guess they didn't tell him the full story. They never do, I replied. And the car, I asked, returned. Richard had to hire a tow truck to deliver it to your office garage. Seems he doesn't want to see you again. I smiled. At least this time he used his Proit. At exactly 5:00 p.m. on the 30th day, a delivery man brought me a brown envelope. Inside were the apartment and beach house keys. No note, no apology, just surrender. I held them, feeling the weight not of metal, but of the lesson they represented. My neighbour, Mrs. Martha, who always knew the news faster than the newspapers, told me that Richard and Susan couldn't afford a hotel. They had to rent a shabby one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs with a small loan Richard barely managed to get. Susan, the social media influencer, was forced to sell her designer handbags, the same ones I'd paid for. The lesson they learned wasn't about love or remorse. They never knew remorse. They learned about power, that the money they warped wasn't theirs, it was mine, and whoever controls the money controls the game. They made me endure public humiliation, but their downfall came quietly and irreversibly. Richard, the big businessman, now takes the bus. Susan, the high society lady, now shops at discount stores. But the biggest change wasn't in them. It was in me. I sold that apartment within a week at a higher price than expected. I didn't let the money sit idle. Using what I'd learned in computer class, I began investing not just in stocks but in myself. I enrolled in the Italian course I'd always dreamed of. Buongiorno, said my Italian teacher, Lorenzo, a charming gentleman who loved the cornbread I baked. I also revived an old plan, Robert, and I once had to build a shelter for stray dogs and cats. With the money from the apartment sale, I bought a small piece of land in the suburbs and started construction. Martin volunteered to handle all the paperwork for free. He said it was the most meaningful work he'd done in years. The house that had once been a symbol of my loneliness now echoed with laughter. Neighbors who had once seen me as a pitiful widow began looking at me differently. In the elevator, Mrs. Martha held my hand and said, "Denise, you didn't just do that for yourself. You did it for all of us, for every woman who's had to stay silent her whole life. You spoke for us." I smiled. I hadn't done it for them, I had done it for me, but by doing so I had inspired others. The impact wasn't just in my bank account, it was in my spirit and in theirs. As for Clara, that wound remained. She didn't call again until about 2 months after her parents moved into their small apartment. One day the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and my heart skipped a beat. It was her. Clara stood there thinner, no longer dressed in designer clothes, just jeans and a t-shirt. She wasn't the radiant bride from Paris anymore, just a lost young woman. I opened the door. We looked at each other for a long time. She simply cried. "Grandma," she finally said, "come in, Clara." She sat on the sofa, the same spot where her parents once begged me for wedding money. "Grandma, I'm divorced." I sat down across from her, not surprised. "What happened, sweetheart?" "Money." "Grandma, the money's gone. My husband, Michael, he didn't marry me for love. He married me because I was Denise Parker's granddaughter. When he found out my parents had nothing left, he changed. He became cruel and resentful. He said he couldn't support a bunch of poor people." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Grandma, I realized his love was just like the kind of love my parents had for you, a love that depended on a bank balance. I went to the kitchen and made chamomile tea with honey, the same thing I used to make for her when she had nightmares as a child." I handed her the cup, her hands trembled. "What about your parents?" I asked. "They haven't changed," she said. "Mom cries all the time and blames Dad. Dad yells and blames you. They never asked how I was. All they wanted to know was whether I'd talked to you, whether I'd apologized on their behalf." She looked down at her cup. "They don't regret humiliating you. They're just angry because they got exposed, because the money's gone." I realized Clara had learned the lesson her parents never would. "Grandma, I know I was wrong," she whispered. "I saw everything. I saw Dad kick you out at the door. I didn't do anything. I was scared, scared to ruin the wedding. Scared Mom would yell at me. I was a coward, and I understand why you did what you did. I'm not angry." I sat beside her and took her hand. "You know, Clara," I said softly, not as the strategist, but as a grandmother, "women like us are taught our whole lives to stay quiet, to keep the peace. They tell us that being old means being gentle, letting people step on us with a smile. But they're wrong. Dignity has no age. It's not something we shed as we grow old. It's our own skin." I squeezed her hand. "What I did wasn't to fight your father, it was to protect myself. I chose my dignity. And unfortunately, that's a lesson you've had to learn the hard way." "I don't have anywhere to go," she murmured. "Michael threw me out. I don't want to go back to my parents." I looked at my granddaughter, the little girl who once learned to ride a bike in my yard. The guest room at the end of the hall is still there, I said, and it will always be yours. Clara didn't turn into a princess. She started working. I didn't give her money, just my old computer and an internet connection. She had a talent for design, so she began freelancing. She started paying the electric and gas bills, becoming truly independent. My transformation was complete, not because I defeated my son, but because I found myself again. I am Denise Parker, a strong, clear-minded woman who manages 6 rental warehouses and an animal rescue center. A woman who speaks Italian and understands stock investments. Richard and Susan never reached out again. Martin told me they once tried to sue me for elder neglect. The judge dismissed it immediately. Now they're nothing more than a small stain in my past. Today, when I look back on that night, I was turned away from the wedding in my pink dress. I don't feel shame anymore. I feel gratitude because the moment I was shut out of that party I paid for was the same moment I was finally invited into my own life. And this is a celebration I'll never let anyone throw me out of again. And what about you? If you were in my place, would you have the courage to say enough and start over? Share your thoughts below so we can talk about family self-respect and the lessons life teaches us. And if you'd like to stay with me through more stories of strength, awakening, and kindness, stay tuned. This journey still has many beautiful chapters ahead.